all the preliminaries have been done? Huh? Formalities? Please, right. So who is going to conduct the ceremony? Ibrahim, no, please start.
Yes. We're going to begin by calling the first questioner. That is Mr. Sadiq Noor, if he would like to come and ask his question.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
You're from?
Somalia.
Somalia, right? Yes.
Thank you. In Ahmadiya's perspective, how do you treat the opinions of the following, especially in fiqh? 1. Imam Shafi. 2. Imam Abu Hanifa. 3. Imam Malik. And lastly, Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal.
That's right.
Thank you.
Yes, you can please sit here, close next to the table here. That's right. We follow him whom they followed, Hazrat Muhammad Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the Holy Quran. All the various schools of fiqh are founded on the Quranic teachings and the teachings of Hazrat Muhammad Rasulullah in explanation of the Holy Quran. Now, when these schools came into being, at that time the traditions were not compiled as we have found them compiled in different books with all the investigations attendant upon the subject of collection of hadith. The rules were not chalked out like this. So whatever they decided upon the specific ahadith which reached them, while other schools following the same sources but having different pieces of hadith presented to them, genuinely and honestly tried to infer from those ahadith which had reached them. Had that not happened, there could not have been any difference between these four fiqhs. Imam of fiqh in himself has no authority. All the authority he draws is from the inferences of the Holy Quran and inferences based on the traditions of the Holy Prophet. So now a time has come that we can have all the material before us, and the best and the most dependable course would be to compare these Aimma's edicts and find out which one, according to our knowledge of today, is closest to the ahadith and the the verses of the Holy Quran as we understand them. Now, this is the general principle we always follow. But it so happened that according to our study, generally Imam Abu Hanifa's fatwa were very largely accepted by the Ummah, and unless we find reasons to disagree with him, we would generally follow the Fiqh Hanafiya. But if in some places we find Hazrat Imam Shafi closer to the Quran and Hadith than Imam Abu Hanifa, then we would follow him. If Hazrat Imam Malik is found to be closest, then we would follow him. Personally, I believe that Hazrat Imam Malik was not only nearest to Hazrat Muhammad Rasulullah in time, but also he was the first collector of ahadith. Muwatta Imam Malik, although it is not counted among the books of ahadith, that is traditions of the Holy Prophet, but it is one of the most authentic books on hadith which was ever written. All its ahadith are also included in Bukhari. So none of them can be objected against by any school of thought. And also, he was blessed by a very special faculty of Allah, blessed by Allah of the very special faculty of jurisprudence. So on the whole, I think Hazrat Imam Malik should also be bracketed with Hazrat Imam Abu Hanifa. But the problems arose later on when, in the name of Maliki Fiqh, scholars of the later ages went on adding quite a few things here and there, creating distances between the fiqh of Hazrat Imam Malik and the fiqh of Abu Hanifa and others as well. So all this is a complicated issue, and it needs to be thoroughly examined. Otherwise, if we do not try to find compromise between these great sources of jurisprudence on the basis of re-examining their sources and attempting to draw new inferences, then this confusion would continue forever, dividing the Ummah. So Hazrat Masih Maud, the founder of the Ahmadiya community, gave us this clear instruction. The Quran is the unchangeable, the authority from God. The unchangeable in the sense that no man has been permitted to interpolate. So it is the most authentic book on these two counts. Number one, all the source of the Sharia is contained in the Holy Quran. Number two, man has not been permitted by God to interfere. So if there is one thing on which we can depend with 100% certainty, it is the Holy Quran. All traditions which are in agreement with the Holy Quran must be respected and accepted in toto. Wherever there are differences, apparent differences between the Holy Quran and some reported ahadith, try to find a compromise as best as possibly you can. If you fail, then that so-called hadith is not a hadith. Then follow the Quran. But in general, where you do not have either the wisdom or the time to investigate personally, directly, the overbearing principle should be that you follow Hazrat Imam Abu Hanifa. This is the entire attitude of Jamaat Ahmadiyya to this problem. Thank you.
So the next questioner is Mr. Craig Howley from Bournemouth.
Please, most welcome.
Afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Just like to ask why a God of love allows so much wickedness in the world today.
The wickedness, the existence, the presence of wickedness, you mean?
Well, the evil and the suffering of the innocent.
Of course. I understand. Would you please occupy this? The basic, the fundamental reason why we suffer is because we suffer at each other's hands. The suffering is the creation of humans. It is not the creation of God. And whenever they deviate from the prescribed course of God, by God, then the suffering is born. Now it's a very complex question because some suffering we find is not a direct result of the person's disregard to any divine order or the injunction. Sometimes such sufferings are born because of the total social attitude to certain things. So you cannot say, this man did not commit that crime, why must he suffer? Humanity as a whole becomes responsible. Like societies in everyday life are considered to be responsible for certain evils which befall some individual members of the societies. When you go to war, you cannot blame the person who is killed by a stray bullet or whose house is put afire by bombardment or razed to ground. You can't ask this question individually, addressing to each one. Why did this happen to him and that to that? It is a law of totality. When the entire total society is responsible for certain disregards to human values, then the society suffers and the individuals make the society, so some individuals would ultimately suffer. So this is again is one area of understanding the suffering. Then those who are born with congenital defects, why should they suffer? What crime they have committed? Those who suffer out of disadvantages which they inherit from a social order or an economic order, like poor countries of the world. This question should be addressed in relation to them as well. Now, as I said earlier, it's a very complex issue, but I have attempted genuinely to answer these questions in relation to the points I have raised, plus many others. In a book which will be very soon published, or if not very soon, within the next 2-3 months, I hope, it will be available. So if you leave your address here, we can send you a copy. And I hope, inshallah, you will find the answers to some degree at least satisfactory. Thank you.
The next questioner is Yusuf Sabu from New Cross.
Assalamu alaikum.
Where Sam, you are from?
New Cross.
Huh?
New Cross.
No, back home.
Oh, Nigeria.
Nigeria, right.
As a young Muslim of the 90s, how do you achieve the right balance between religious fulfillment and social fulfillment, considering society
Religious
today?
and social what?
Fulfillments.
Fulfillments.
Yeah.
Now this is a question which needs to be defined further. Can you conceive of any religious fulfillment?
I mean, like
Can you conceive of any religious fulfillment which would be at odds with the requirements of social fulfillments?
Yeah.
Can you?
Yeah.
Then point out, then I'll answer.
Okay. Like your daily prayers, for example.
Huh?
Daily prayers.
Right.
Okay, because you have to go to work, attend lectures.
But this is not a social area. This is an area of economic activity of man.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So if that is what you have in mind, then I'll answer this question directly.
Okay.
Otherwise, as long as the question remains vague, I will not be in a position to answer it with any measure of rationality and understanding, right?
Yeah.
So let me attend this particular question which you have raised now.
Okay.
You are expected to say your prayers 5 times a day, correct? And who has created you? And who has made all the provisions of subsistence for you? Your employers or God? Tell me.
God.
Okay. Do you really believe in that?
Yeah.
Then who has the priority?
God.
Even if God withdraws the blessing of water from a country for a while, even if the country is most advanced in the world, has all the means of modern power at its disposal, it is absolutely helpless in creating water and meet the requirements at its own resources, by its own resources. What happened in England a month or 2 ago, there was a very severe drought, and the British people are a very advanced people materially, yet there was talk of what shall we do if no more water came from heaven. How will we meet this requirement? If they want to manufacture water of their own, the energy required for that and the expenditure needed for that would be far beyond all the resources of the British people. So this is what I mean. Just look at one single aspect of God's grace. Imagine the entire system of the lifting of water from the sea and its purification. The sea water is absolutely unfit for the usage of any animal except those which are made to live in sea water. Now, how could that water be purified through human efforts, and how could that water be transferred to the heights of the Himalaya mountains and the heights of all the great mountains? Can you ever conceive of a system better than the one conceived by God and implemented? So forget about all the other means of providence. Just look at the most amazing and complicated system of the purification of water, lifting of it, and it's being carried to thousands of miles to such places where the temperature is kept at a very low level. So they are preserved there to meet the day-to-day need of man when there are no rains. Because if it rained continuously, then man would be deprived of his requirements of food. If it did not rain continuously, then if it was not put in a frozen reservoir on the top of the mountains, it would not be available at all. And amazing it is that the requirement of daily food are also directly related to this system of purification of water and transport of water, because it is condensed through the influence of highly charged electrical, let me say, under the influence of flow of electricity, highly charged with a very high potential. Electricity from one phase to another, from positive to negative. As the potential of the electricity rises in the heaven, it rises to unimaginable heights. It rises sometimes to millions of volts. And the difference between one charged particle, cloud, and the other charged cloud is what creates these lightning strikes. And when this happens, many other things also happen. If it had not happened, first of all, water would not be condensed back to its form of water. It is through the electrical charge that the suspended colloidal particles of water in the air, which we call the clouds, they would not coagulate. So at the same time, as it is coagulated, under the influence of these high electrical charges, the manure needed for the growth of vegetation is created. In one day, throughout the world, through this electrical phenomenon, more manuring, or what you call this, artificial manure, like sulfates and ammonias, etc., all the artificial manure, it is calculated that the manure, artificial manure, which is, or fertilizers, which are created in the entire industry on the globe in 1 year, cannot match the artificial manure created in the heavens through electrical influences in 1 day. Without that, there will be no vegetative growth, no life left on earth. So what a fantastic thing to have happened. The flow in the direction of the mountain, then the water, the melting of the water now. This is also a very interesting phenomenon which has to be understood. Otherwise, you will not know the importance of prayer, or worship, or expression of gratitude to the Creator. This is what is all important here in relation to your question. if the water had gone on being collected and amassed on the mountain tops where the temperature never rises, say minus 30 or 20 or whatever it is, if it rises, then it would not be frozen, of course. The temperature remains constantly below zero. How would it melt? It requires a special law to be created. Now that law is only in relation to water and ice. According to this law of nature, which is specific for water and ice, under the pressure of the ice, the lowest surface, the temperature at the lowest surface which touches the soil goes on increasing. It is not equally distributed to the whole of the ice pack. Only the surface which touches the soil on the mountains, that becomes so hot, not hot in the ordinary sense, but so hot as to be able to melt the ice closest to the surface. So it goes on melting continuously at a regulated rate. Otherwise, if the heat was to be raised over the entire area of the mountains, then the whole ice would melt in 1 month or within, say, a month or so, and all the water would, instead of benefiting man, would flood the whole earth. So it had to be regulated and calculated so that continuously, over the year, the human requirements are met. Can you conceive of a better system? More well organized, more well planned, by an authority which also has the command over the laws of nature. Otherwise, these special laws, if they were not created by God for this purpose, would never come into operation. But that's not all. There's another aspect which has to be understood. How is the electricity produced? That again is a very interesting thing. The electricity is produced because of a very specific law, that when water evaporates, it automatically generates electricity, while it doesn't happen in other cases. Why must water create electricity? The surface it leaves has a negative electricity left behind, and the surface, the vapors which rise, they have a specific electric charge. And this charge varies in different positions, in different parts of the ocean or the water surfaces. Its operation is well organized and well controlled, so that the clouds which we see in the air are either negatively charged or positively charged. And the sum total is so balanced that when they come close to each other, they negate the potential begins to flow from one side to the other. The resultant is zero. And by the time both the charges are zeroed, all the water hanging in the air becomes water again. And you are asking me this question. What should we do? Should we neglect the minimum we can do to recognize the grace of Allah and prefer the worldly employers for what they pay us? For 8 hours tiring service you are paid. But to God you can't go 5 times a day for only a few minutes. What justice is in that? Right? Thank you.
Thank you.
The next questioner is Jariullah, I can't pronounce his surname, Jariullah Akin Abuda from
You
leadership.
understand, you know whom we're
Do
talking
you
about.
like-
Come on.
Assalamu alaikum wa
How are
rahmatullah.
you?
I'm fine, thank you. I'm learning Urdu, so I should say, I should pronounce in Urdu. Aapka kya haal hai?
शुक्रिया, मैं अच्छा हूँ. आप ठीक हैं?
Only some, vaguely. Still learning. I mean, I shouldn't really take up the time.
If you participate in my Urdu classes, which I take
Inshallah,
regularly,
one day.
then inshallah you'll learn Urdu in a matter of no time.
Inshallah. Okay. My question's more related to, I watched the television, I think it was last week or a week and a half ago, and I saw that there's a specific movement within Islam of other sects that seem to have some, they like segregated schools. And I want to know what your opinion is on the benefits and the disadvantages of such a movement, maybe within our own community or just within the other sexual communities.
I do not quite grasp the question as to
Okay.
what sort of movements you're talking about.
Okay, in this country, to start off with, there were like Roman Catholic schools specifically based for Roman Catholic
Oh
people.
yes, that's what
And
you
that-
mean,
yeah.
that movement
Yeah, that's what I'm talking
of
about.
providing religious education
Yes,
to various children, school-going children in Britain,
yes.
right? Yes. I remember my discussion with the then Minister of Education or Secretary of Education of Britain, whom I had invited to dine with me, and he had accepted it very gracefully. And at that time, this question was very hotly debated. And because he was in a position to influence the decision of the government, he asked my advice as well. The advice I rendered him, and I stand by it even today and will continue to stick to that advice, was simply this, that if in school educations you begin to succumb to the pressures of demands by any religion, that the government should be responsible for religious education as well, then you will be opening a Pandora's box which will never be shut again. And you will be inviting trouble and headache. What about the Hindus demanding the same as Muslims are doing? What about the Sikhs? What about the Zoroastrians, the Buddhists, and the other cultists of all sorts? If one member of the society has a right in a certain area, all other members of the society have the rights in the same area. And then what control will you exercise over the misrepresentation of religious ideologies by their own scholars themselves? Islam is not anymore a single identity or entity. It has got split into so many. Prior to you, a questioner asked me about this school of jurisprudence and that school of jurisprudence. But jurisprudence is okay. It doesn't, discussions on jurisprudence no longer boil the blood of people who are involved in such discussions. But when you turn to the area of doctrines and beliefs, then the whole society is worked up by the mullahs or the leaders of any religion to a degree that they always, this agitation created by the heads of religions always ends up in bloodshed and violence. So where is the wisdom of entering this, this area of disorder and the area which would certainly lead to violence and split of the society, and many affection would come to not only disagree, but in their disagreement to reach each other's throats, to quell the vice before it rises. Now, this is the human experience. Why to enter this most horrible area of controversy which you will never be able to bring under control again. Yet I agree that there is a certain area of religious education which should be introduced in the schools and colleges, which could never lead to any hot controversies, and that is the moral aspect of religious teachings. You ask Christians what is the ideal moral teachings and start introducing it in the schools. Ask the Muslims what is your ideal moral teaching and start introducing it in the schools. This moral teaching, whether it is of Hindus or the Muslims or the Sikhs, has a universality about it. When we say religions are split, they're always split in the areas of beliefs beyond the reach of humans. They fly high somewhere in the air, and we can never fix them and determine whether this is right or that right. So why to enter a controversy which cannot be resolved anyway? Why not take the best of the religious teaching, which relates to human relationship? There are two areas of religious teachings. One, man's relation with God. The disorders are created only in this area of doctrinization, area of beliefs and faith. Those British religious leaders who become custodians of people's faith, they don't like their following to be transferred to the following of others of the same type, who become custodians of a different set of beliefs regarding God, angels, prophets, and other such areas which relate to God. So you cannot determine the truth of this anyway. So leave them for the religious leaders to settle between themselves as best as they can. You accept only the moral teachings. And that is what is most direly needed in the society today. Our children, because they have not been taught in the subject of morality, because of this lack of morality, as they grow up with a feeling that they have no responsibility to God, they have no responsibility to the society, only they have responsibility to themselves and their own personal egoistic pleasures. When they grow up with this concept and no moral teaching has gone into their educational background, then it is bound to create an ideal atmosphere for crime to grow. So it is a necessity, whether somebody believes in religion or not. Religious moral teachings are so essential that no country can peacefully survive without paying special attention to these things. Japan has already done it. Although their concept of religion is so different from the well-established religions elsewhere, yet they don't teach morality in the name of religions anyway. They teach morality in the name of humanity. And they have a very highly developed system now, which is introduced at the lowest level of schools, and it continues to be continues to remain in the syllabus even for students of higher education. And yet, of course I know, they have not been able to resolve their moral problems as yet, but there are some decencies in their behavior, some discipline in their conduct, which you cannot find elsewhere in the world. It's largely because of this moral teaching introduced at the lowest level of education. So one should thrash the whole issue threadbare and find out the real reasons behind all the unrest and lack of peace, etc. And I'm sure if you do it the way I have suggested, you will agree with me that religion should not be touched with a 10-foot pole as far as the area of ideology is concerned. Leave it alone. But as far as the morality goes, you adhere to it strongly, positively. This is going to improve the quality of the society in general.
Thank you.
Right?
Jazakallah.
Thank you very much. Jazakumullah.
Some of our guests are a bit shy, so some questions have been given to me, so I will
Right,
ask the
please.
questions on their behalf.
That's right.
One of the questions is, in view of the fact that the Holy Shroud of Jesus is a medieval forgery, how can you prove that Jesus did not die on the cross?
All right. You see, this question presupposes that until the discovery of this so-called shroud, we had no evidence of Jesus' deliverance from the cross. And Ahmadiyyat came to be born along with the discovery of shroud. It's absolutely wrong. Shroud could only work as an additional evidence in favor of our view, not at all as the fundamental and central evidence. Number one, and number two, this claim that the shroud has been already proved to be fake is wrong. Nothing has been proved. The religious scientists who have rejected such reports, that the highest scientific authorities of NASA went into the investigation of the dating of the shroud, and they discovered with a unanimity that this shroud, according to carbon dating, could not have been older than 1200 years backwards. More knowledgeable scientists have rejected this. One of the Russian scientists, for instance, who is expert on carbon dating, he says he's surprised to find this claim, because carbon dating cannot be fixed within a period of a few years only. It can swing to 1,000 miles this way or 1,000 miles that way. So if you add 1,000 miles to 1,200, that would still be acceptable to scientists, should be acceptable to scientists. Moreover, that is not the only evidence in favor of the genuineness of shroud. The genuineness of shroud has so many other evidence, or pieces of evidence, that put together they should be studied, and as such they have never been rejected by scientists, because some of the evidence is beyond their scope of determination. Scientifically, they can only say that the blood marks on the shroud are neither paint nor marks created by the burning or scorching of the cloth. Sometimes red patches appear as at the aftermath of a fire. That cloth may not be burned, but it is scorched and it changes color sometimes. Now, the scientists who have examined those spots, they have determined without disagreement that this was genuine blood. As far as the image on the shroud is concerned, the scientists agree that this is a negative image. And no NASA inquiry has rejected this. They may not speak of this because it will go against their findings. But none has been able to reject this claim that the shroud, the image on the shroud, was not a positive image, but was a negative image. Now the questions are raised and are still being studied as to how this image could have been created. The scientists disagree as to the processes which might have led to the creation of this negative image. But none, and I repeat, none of them has been able to present a scenario whereby a fake artist could have painted a negative image of Christ on a cloth. Why on earth, hundreds of years before the invention of the camera and photography, should a man conceive of a negative and produce a negative 1200 years ago, which even today the most competent artists cannot do? They know what negative is. Yet if you ask them to create a negative of Noonan, for instance, Ibrahim Noonan, they will not be able to do it. When you reprint it and create a positive, you will not be able to recognize yourself. But that image, when a positive is created from there, printed from that, presents a perfect image of a man of the description of Jesus Christ, which is found elsewhere in the books and annals. How on earth this could have happened? All they say or can say is that it is impossible. If it is impossible, how could it be there? There has to be some way available to nature, some means available to nature to create this negative image. But man has no means to create this negative image, at least at the time when the scientists agree it must have been created. They don't bring the age closer to 1200 years. So can you imagine anybody making a negative image of something when he has no idea what negative is? So the evidence is so powerful and overwhelming that this cloth cannot be declared as a fake cloth. All that they can say is that the age of this cloth falls short of the age of Jesus Christ when worked out backwards from our time. If Jesus Christ happened to be 2000 years ago, then all the best they can say is that this cloth does not reach that age backwards in time. But then, who was the person? Why this miracle? In favor of whom? Because miraculous it is. Not against the laws of nature, but miraculous, of course. So they are avoiding many important questions which have to be raised. But fortunately, there are other scholars who are pursuing this matter further. And there is one Ahmadi scholar particularly, and also an Ahmadi scientist lady in America, who have been entrusted the task by our research group here of making further investigations. And we believe, inshallah, we will be able to provide enough evidence to give a lie to the so-called NASA report and establish the fact that under certain natural circumstances, an image on a cloth of this description can be created. But that's not all that we depend upon. You said about our evidence. The evidence, first of all, lies in the fact that when Jesus' body was taken down from the cross and pierced, blood and water gushed out. Now, every medical expert can tell you that blood does not gush out of the body of a dead man or out of a corpse. Why should it? It's coagulated. So this evidence, number two, the legs of Jesus Christ were not broken, while the legs of the other two culprits who were hanged by his side, they were broken. Again, the time he spent on the cross was no more than a few hours. On a Friday afternoon, he was hanged or put to cross, and before the sun set, his body was taken down. Because the Sabbath was to begin, and according to Jewish practices, nobody was permitted to continue to hang when the Sabbath started. And it started with the sunset. So why should they have taken 3 days normally to kill a man through crucifixion, if he could be easily disposed of within 2-3 hours? That means normally this was a means of not only causing death, but to cause torture. A death through torture was behind the design of crucifixion. But Jesus did not hang beyond a few hours. And he was a sturdy man, very stiff habits, very pure habits. So we can't imagine him having died so quickly. Another thing, another piece of evidence from the Bible is that some sorts of ointment was prepared by his disciples and was applied to his body. There is absolutely no reason for any ointment to have been applied to his body if he was not alive. Because dead men's bodies were never applied with any potions or ointments. So that is another piece of evidence why it happened. Why the secrecy about his burial place or sepulchre? Why was Jews so worried? And why they went to Pilate demanding his body? Why did they express their doubt about his being alive? If his death was so certain and the whole people had accepted as a positive, as something which had happened positively, then there was no reason why Jews should have gone to Pilate and said, produce his body or put some guards over his sepulchre, because he may not have died. And again, they blamed him, in their words, for treachery. They say he was a cunning man, treacherous man. He may come to life again while he had never died at all. So he may claim that he had come to life again. While he was still alive and having cured of his wounds, he may appear in public and say, look here, this is my miracle. All this shows that the people, the first witnesses of the time, were not sure of what had happened. The only evidence which is presented by some Christians in favor of the eyewitnesses, so-called eyewitnesses, while the eyewitness is not determined as to who it was and how close he could reach the body, is that then somebody standing nearby saw him give up the ghost. No, he didn't see the ghost escaping his body, of course. Anybody who swoons, for instance, will appear to have given his ghost to an onlooker at some distance. But this particular evidence was specifically rejected by Jesus himself. Because when he appeared to some of his disciples and they suspected him to be a ghost, he said, no, I am not a ghost. I am the same person who was crucified. Come and touch my wounds here and there, see the signs. So some unidentified witness says he gave up the ghost, and the ghost himself, the so-called ghost, says, no, I am not a ghost. So there's so much evidence, and I have spoken on this subject from various angles repeatedly during my question and answer sessions, but I think for the time being this should suffice. Thank you.
There's another question.
Yes, please. Yes.
What does your community believe about Jesus' resurrection and salvation? I think
I have already answered, but I'll further elaborate this from the angle of this question. What we believe is that Jesus was miraculously saved by God in accordance with the promise he had made himself. So the miracle did not lie in the fact that he once died and then was revived from the dead. The miracle lay that he was never permitted to die. He survived the trials of death through which he suffered. There are two reasons why I believe that according to the testimony of Jesus Christ himself, he was promised an escape from such an ignoble death. Number one, before the crucifixion, he told his disciples that he would leave them and go in search of the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Right or wrong? You remember that?
Yeah, correct.
Yes. So if he died upon cross and was revived from the dead, did he go in search of the lost sheep of the house of Israel or not? This was a prophecy. Why did he not fulfill it? What right had he, after having committed himself to that journey in pursuit of the lost sheep of Israel, to have flown up into heaven? So that was a contradiction. That very belief that he ascended to heaven is a contradiction of Jesus' own commitments. He was a true prophet, and that is exactly what we take him to be, and we believe in him. To be a very true and a very highly placed prophet, highly ranked prophet of Allah. So when he said, I will go in search of the lost sheep of Israel, he must have made this commitment because of some divine revelation. And he could not break that promise. Number two, when he prayed to God, prior to the day when he was ultimately crucified or attempted to be crucified, he kept on praying to God and coaxed his disciples who went to sleep. Is this the night to go to sleep? Wake up and cry with me and pray to God. Pray to God the Father to take away this bitter cup of death. This is a very important prayer which must be understood by all the lovers of Jesus Christ, because it proves two things. Number one, he did not offer himself as sacrifice voluntarily for the sake of so-called redemption of sinful people. Had that been ever intended, he would never have prayed to God to take away this bitter cup from him. They are two contradictory things. Number two, the way he prayed, I do not believe that prayer was not accepted. Why I do not believe it? Because the last cry he is reputed to have made was Eli, Eli, lema sabachthani. If God had finally rejected his prayer and he was told that he must die, he must drink this bitter cup, then what a surprise that was. Why? Have you abandoned me? Or could you abandon me? This was not a cry of disbelief. This was a way of praying to God, reminding him his promise. You, the night before, told me that your prayers have been accepted. What do I see? I seem to be on the verge of death. This is the true meaning of that cry, Eli, Eli, lema sabachthani. So it could not have been abandoned by God. He was saved miraculously and thereby proved to be a true prophet of God against the counter-claims of the Jews of his period, his time. they inferred from a biblical prophecy that if somebody attributes false revelations to God, that God had spoken to him and it was not true, he would hang by the tree to death. And if he dies, then he is to be taken definitely as a liar. So Jesus was not a liar. The perverted claim that he died for the sake of us, so he was not, that does not carry any sense. The biblical statement was absolutely clear about it. If a man is a liar against God, he will be punished by death upon the tree. That is, every scholar understands it to be crucifixion. So he must have escaped that death, that ignoble death. And this is exactly what we believe in. We believe him to be a true, honest, highly ranked prophet of God who made prophecies after he had received revelation from God, and all his prophecies got fulfilled, including that of pursuing the course of the earlier Israelites, and including that of escape from the death upon cross. Right?
So the next questioner is Mustafa Anu from Lambeth.
Alu?
Anu.
Alu is potato. you maybe it's differently pronounced. Eh?
Probably. My Irish accent.
Mustafa, hello, how are you? First of all, what about your headache?
Still there.
Still there?
Yes.
All the time?
All the time.
God save you. Now, tell me about the second part of your name. Is it Alu or something else?
So it's Ano.
Ano, yeah, that's fine. Mustafa Ano.
It's fine. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
So we've seen that the European nations are coming together, forming something as EEC. I want to know the advantage and the disadvantages to the European nation and the whole world at large.
First of all, the advantages, the good news. The fact is that behind the working of the mind which conceived of this plan, or the minds which conceived of this plan, were hanging the swords of two world wars. Europe, in the state of different, as a continent, having so many different states with independent authorities, despite all their best efforts, got split again and again on the issues which in fact were economic issues, but the interests of various states were at loggerheads with each other concerning certain economic issues. This has always happened, and these things, when they grow further, they always, if not always, most often, produce wars. So having read the whole, of course they must have gone into the entire history and the background, reasons why these wars took place. They must have inferred that Germany seems to be the center to the whole issue. And as long as Germany has that capability of building itself a very powerful economic machinery and posing threat to the economic interests of other countries, and also gaining so much strength that it should go into their head, they must emerge supreme now and take the revenge of what rest of the Europe has been doing to them in the past history. They must have thought that this is a logical, inevitable conclusion which would work exactly the same way as it worked previously. So the first answer to this question was presented by Churchill, which is mentioned in his memoirs of the World War II. He suggested to President Roosevelt and also to Stalin that as long as Germany remains united it will always pose threat to peace. So let us divide it into two parts. He willingly gave half of it to Russia. All right, take it and do whatever you like with it. And we have control over the other part, and we will befriend it, and a polarization will begin. He didn't say it in so many words, but this is exactly what he said very clearly, that to save peace in Europe, it is a must that this country must be divided into two. And a polarization must result from that. So German pitched against German. That would give peace to the rest of Europe or guarantee some manner of peace for them. But the times changed. This division no longer suited the political requirements of the entire world, America included. So as the Berlin Wall fell, we can see that up to that time, already Europe must have realized that it was a folly to divide Germany. It became absolutely clear during the fall or collapse of German Wall. But it was not a news to Europe only at that time. They must have calculated long before that these people, if kept divided and one half of it handed over to USSR, would create havoc with the peace of the whole world, because they are very special people, very industrious and very disciplined. They will play a vital role in favor of USSR in the next world war whenever it takes place, because they were idealized. So as such, they already had second thinkings, second thoughts on this issue. So these factors must have given birth to, politically I mean, these factors must have given birth to the concept of one united Europe in which Germany should be absorbed as a single, as one entity, not independent, but as a part of one united Europe. The second were the economic compulsions, which were related to the outside world more than the internal requirements. Germany could compete economically with the rest of the Europe, but the problem was not just that. The problem was that with America on the one end and China and Far East on the other, individually European countries could not have built their economy so powerfully as to compete with America on the one hand and the Far Eastern countries on the other by themselves independently as small countries. So to work a plan of economy whereby the united might of European economy could stand on its own and compete fairly with advantage with other big countries of the world in the world markets. This must have been also a very powerful idea which drove them to force some sort of unity. And other small factors of convenience, for instance, travel to European countries, doing away with passports and visas and all this nonsense, behave like more civilized people and let us enjoy jointly all that we have, all that possess, and share the possession of others as ours. This psychological factor must also have worked in the making of this idea. These are the good points, right? And the bad points are that this scheme has already created those very jealousies which they wanted to avoid. First of all, this did not bring into the focus of their attention, perhaps, obviously I feel, the factor that the national loyalties in Europe have sunk so deep and are rooted so deeply in their history and thinking that you simply cannot sever the ties of their national growth from their roots and plant them elsewhere as a garden with new roots to it. This new identification with Europe is a very serious problem, more so for the British, because they have a very glorious past of independence, of diplomacy, which not only matched but more than matched any other diplomacy of any other people in the world. Politically conscious people of the world know that and would agree to this claim that the British political awareness and diplomacy is rooted deep into the history of their colonization, and no other nation shares it equally with them. That is why America, despite being a very great country, has always been dependent on British advice on such matters, until Mrs. Thatcher came. Then a new era began of British giving in, handing in their own right of superiority in diplomacy and world politics to their elder brother America, which was resented, of course, by many other politicians, and they are trying to return back to their own independent identity. So, but yet, despite the fact of this overmuch leaning towards America, causing such bickerings in many parts of the British society, one thing they know, and that is certain, that history has put them in the bracket of Americas more than in the bracket of Europeans. Americas originally belonged more to the British than to any other nation. By Americas, I mean Northern America, including Canada. And they have a natural, affinity towards each other, a sense of deep association. So it is very difficult for Britain to ignore those historic ties and accept a new identity for themselves, which is limited to European confines. And when they accept it, then also they have to give in voluntarily their rights of an independent nation, because the majority of European countries would always tend to gang against Britain, because deep inside they have some disturbing experience of historical superiority of the British in politics and having their own way. So these thoughts are not brought to the focus of attention clearly as I am defining them, but they go into the human psyche. They work without people taking notice of them so clearly. So something disturbing is happening to the British. Shall we be completely resigning ourselves that historic authority which we gained with so much labor in the past and handing it over to other nations of Europe with their majority? Then there will be lobbying, naturally, which has already started. French lobby, German lobby, that lobby and that lobby. What is Britain in that lobbying when the continent as a whole considers itself to be the main representative of European land? Britain, of course, is an island, accepted as European, but still a step European, like stepchild. So these factors are going to play a role in future. It's impossible to avoid them, to bypass them. The second bad point is that a pole would be created in Europe ultimately against America. with the passage of time, American authority would be weakened, and as they gain more strength in their own economy, they are going to reject American, I don't want to say bullyism, but the American authority overmuch exercised on the European will. Then the race for the markets, if not an internal race between one country of Europe and another, it would be a race between America and Europe as such. And then on the other hand, America would bypass Europe and bring Japan closer to itself, and Korea, and some other Far Eastern countries, to offset the loss of its authority upon Europe. So there are very grave efforts to be witnessed in the near future, whereby the economic solution which they have found is going to turn into an economic problem for the entire world. Then Russia is next door to us. Russia cannot be absorbed into Europe as a single European entity, completely losing its identity. It's not possible. Russia's history has always been independent. When there was British Empire, there was also Tsarist Russian Empire. And they always go along with the other smaller states around them, comparatively small states, but very powerful states economically. And they cannot survive economically without interdependence on each other. The industry throughout the communist period has been so well planned and designed, or badly planned and designed, that one part of USSR is the productive part and the other part is the industrial part. So they cannot survive independently of each other. Raw material comes mostly from Muslim states, and the food also comes mostly from Muslim states, Kazakhstan, etc. And they are manufactured and processed industrially in Russia, not in USSR as a whole. Of course there is industry everywhere, but I'm talking of the highest concentration of industry to be in what we know as Russia, a state within USSR. So they are going to come into their own after a while, after surviving the shock of the change in their economy. They will ultimately settle down. And other nucleus would be created next door to Europe with a very strong economic machinery, so powerful that they can't realize at this moment actually how powerful that machinery is if put into operation. Because the economic machinery of USSR is highly technical. Technicality, if you speak of technicality and scientific education, Europe cannot compete with USSR in the area of fundamental industry. They can compete, of course, with USSR in the sophisticated items of daily use, in the production of such sophisticated items as excellent clothes, most beautiful cars, comfortable this and that. Russia can't beat with them. But per capita, Russia has far more industrious economists, scientists, as well as technologists in Russia, in USSR, than any other country of Europe, or even if you put their might together, still USSR has an edge over this. So once their economy falls into steps, then they are going to turn into a very powerful economic machinery. Previously, it failed to produce impact because most of the production of the industry was directed at war machinery. If there is no threat of war anymore, as it will dissipate naturally within the next few years to begin with, then it will come back later. But this initial removal of immediate threat of war will give Russia ultimate advantage to divert its industry to other common day-to-day usage of the Russians themselves. They have been deprived of this. This is why there is so much suffering. But no more so. Already the shift is taking place. So these and so many other factors speak of a gloomy future in relation to the immediate advantages which we can see and which some of which I have counted. Right?
Thank you very much.
But why should you be interested in this question of Europe, while you should have paid more attention to the unification of African states, which are fighting with each other without drawing any cue from their history, without drawing any lesson from their history. They're good in fighting each other inside and outside. Gosh, what's happening there? Right?
Next time, maybe I'll come to Africa.
By the time you come to Africa, I hope Africa will be left. The way they are destroying each other, unbelievable. How the Sierra Leoneans are cutting the throats of Sierra Leoneans. How the Nigerian society is divided into warring factions on religious plane, on political plane, on economic plane. You know, things are happening in Liberia, have happened in Liberia and other parts of the state. What is happening in Zaire? These are very serious problems which are very close to the edge of the precipice. Then the moral the moral destruction of the society as a whole. Truth is fast disappearing. Integrity or honesty or trust are evaporating very fast from African soil. And again, unfortunately, AIDS is spreading like wildfire in many African countries. So all these are factors which should, which should create a sort of panic among the Africans living outside in apparent isolated piece of Europe. It's a very serious question I have raised. I want to draw the attention of all Africans living in Europe or America or other Western countries to forget their own personal advantages and return to their country deprived of all resources, even the human resources. The best they produce of scientists seeks employment elsewhere in the advanced countries. So it is Africa far more to be worried about than anything that may happen to Europe. Right?
Thank you very much.
So the next questioner is Aisha Amrut from Hanslow.
Yes, Aisha, you're most welcome. Where are you? I don't see any lady responding to your call. So
Unless the word is
might
Aisha.
not have come. Huh? Is she an English lady with a Muslim name?
Yes, Muslim.
Pardon?
She is Muslim, but she's not Ahmadi.
Of course, that's not what I asked. I said, is she an English lady?
No,
No.
she's African.
Acha, okay, African. But she has not come, so turn to the other next question.
She's,
Pardon?
at the moment she's shying next time.
Okay, all right.
Then the next questioner should be, and I have to get this name pronounced properly now as well, is Marhalim Amir from Gloucester.
Pardon? What name did you say?
Halim.
Halim.
It's called Halim.
Right.
Assalamu alaikum.
From Scotland. Assalamu alaikum. Yes, please.
Yes, Gloucester. I believe before I came in Britain, when I was living in Malaysia, I'm from Malaysia, and we believe that by the time Imam Mahdi comes to this world, and Islam will be the strongest religions in the world, isn't it? And what's so confused now is if we say that this religion is the strongest religion in this world, and why at the past 3 years, when Bosnia was suffered from attack from Christian community, why there is no Islamic country comes to in front of let's say PBB and solve this problem? Why we have America and
Okay. You have asked two questions in one, right?
yeah.
The second question I advise you to address to Saudi Arabia, to Kuwait, to Jordan, to Syria, and to such countries you are blaming for their absolute lack of interest in the Muslim affairs, right?
Yeah.
I'm not answerable for what they do. But I'm answerable only on behalf of Jamaat Ahmadiya with our belief that Imam Mahdi has come, right?
Yeah, sir.
Now, as far as your hearsay reports about Imam Mahdi suddenly transforming the world of Islam into the most powerful people on earth, I disagree with that view as false on the count of contrary historical evidence. No man who was ever raised by God as prophet or a messenger or a reformer brought about such a miracle in the world. Not even Hazrat Muhammad Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. 1400 years have passed and still you yourself are quoting the example of the Bosnians being Muslims completely helpless at the mercy and laid at the mercy of their non-Muslim enemies. And there again, it is not the Christians who have perpetrated any crime against them. That's also wrong. Those who have perpetrated most horrid crimes against the Bosnian Muslims are religious people. There is no religion to them. They are practically atheists and morally destitute. So why to blame Christianity unnecessarily for the crime committed by non-Christians? Understand? Now coming back to the question of the Imam Mahdi, I remind you to the basic fundamental principle that God has enunciated in the Holy Quran repeatedly, which is lan tajida li sunnatillahi tabdila wa lan tajida li sunnatillahi tahwila. The ways in relation to mankind, in relation to religions, have become parts of human history and religious history. And you will never see any change in the conduct of God in relation to the attitudes of peoples on earth. And repeatedly it challenges man to find one single example where God changed his ways and his attitude to the problems. Whenever he raised a prophet, he raised that prophet from the weakest of the people. No, not the weakest of the people, among the strongest, of course, of the society, but individually so weak that he was never supported by any powerful group. Every prophet came independently as a single person. Yet he gained following through a very strong, persistent struggle and endeavor which he continuously made, regardless of the pressure of the enemies against him. The miracle, which is the sunnah of God in this case, which was common to all prophets, was that despite the fact they were neither supported by a powerful social group, economic group, religious group, political group, they were, even if they were popular, they were left alone after they claimed to be from God, yet they emerged victorious, invariably. But through a slow process of change, which began with moral change. And that change itself was not brought about through a spell cast by a prophet. That change was brought about through human sacrifices. Each person who answered to the call of a prophet accepted a miserable life for the sake of the truth. He was put into the middle of torture and persecution. And the society which honored him before treated him as a menial. And as such, there is no inconsistency in the ways of God if you apply those, if you learn those ways through human history. From the time of Adam up to Ahmad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, this is the story of the prophets repeated over and over again, exactly like this. If the people did not reform finally and rejected him altogether, then the people were wiped out, not the prophet. What happened to the people of Noah? What happened to the people of Lot? So the religious history as preserved in the Holy Quran is most reliable and unchangeable. How can you fit the concept of Imam Mahdi in that history? Where can you fit it? If you believe that suddenly somebody is divinely appointed and with his supernatural power, he destroys the rest of the world and makes those who share his views in religion conqueror of the whole world. Why so? If they are themselves corrupt people, if they are at least as corrupt as other people are, what justice there would be in God bringing about a revolution in favor of such a people like you find in many Muslim states. If you really study the current history of the Muslim states, you will find that most of the people living there have become dishonest, corrupt, and indulging in all the malpractices in which the rest of the world is indulging. Name a crime which you find elsewhere in the world and which is not found in the Muslim states. So why one fine morning should Imam Mahdi appear and say, all right, do whatever you please? Religion does not appear for the purpose of revolutionizing the morals and conduct. Religion only comes to establish the supremacy of one people, and that is all. So I have come and you will emerge as victorious. I'll hand over the keys of the world to you and disappear back to nothing else. Can you agree with this scheme of things? It's impossible. Right? Thank you.
So the next questioner is Mr. Abdullah Camps.
Mr. Abdullah Camps. Camps.
Camps.
That's right.
Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum, Abdullah. How are you?
Very well, thank you.
Alhamdulillah.
Very well. My question is on the question of vision. Since becoming a brother, I have received through quite a lot of visions. I would like to hear your guidance on how one should take these visions.
You see, visions can be born out of illusions as well, and working of the human psyche by itself. So it's a very fine area which should be observed unbiased with great caution. Visions which come from God have their own signs, their own evidence within them, whereby you can separate them from the products of human psyche. If they do not possess such signs, then don't give them any importance. They may have been caused because of your suddenly turning religious more seriously than ever before and thinking on religious ideology or views, taking greater interest, personal interest than ever before, right? In such a state, it is quite likely that the mind gets agitated. And every human mind is provided with that machinery which is responsible for the experience of visions. But the difference is when it is agitated by God's command, then purposeful messages are delivered through visions. Otherwise, left alone, anybody can have visions and illusions and imaginary hosts or demons before him, or even angels. But what I have pointed out is that when a vision is from God, it has a quality of truth which cannot be confused with other visions. It has a message and a language which cannot be concocted by human psyche. And the future events which are foretold in many visions prove the truth of the visions. So there is no question of your misreading the vision from Allah and confusing them with the products of your own psyche. For instance, I draw your attention to the dream, which is a sort of vision, of course, of the king, the Egyptian king, at the time of Hazrat Yusuf alayhi salatu wasalam. He saw a dream which people thought was just a product of psyche. But Hazrat Joseph, who was specially gifted by Allah in the art of interpretations, when this vision was related to him, he read the whole message so clearly that despite the fact that the message related to the 7 years to come from that time, when he read it, every year gave evidence in favor of the truth of that vision, which related to the whole people, not only of Egypt, but of people, related to the welfare of the people even around Egypt. So the visions which come from God have that quality of special language, special quality of truth within them, which sometimes defy those qualities the seer of the vision himself. He doesn't know what the vision is talking about. Like the king was confused. But when presented to a more knowledgeable person who has been trained in the art of reading visions, they suddenly fall into, like pieces of jigsaw, into right places. So that is all that I can say at this moment. But if there are any particular visions which are agitating your mind, you can write to me, and inshallah I'll help you understand the meaning. Okay?
Thank you. There's a Mr. Trevor Allen would like to put not a question, but he would like to reply to a question. So he would like to. Mr. Trevor Allen.
Please.
Afternoon. First of all, I'd like to say thank you for clarifying this position. The question I had before about Christians in Bosnia, I don't identify with those people at all as Christians.
I've already spoken on this, haven't I?
Yes, thank you for clarifying that. But my points are connected with, we were talking before,
Yes.
about the death of Jesus. The anointing oil, which talked about the medicine, which you talked about as medicine, actually is what the Jewish custom was for burial. They would put this ointment upon the body for burial, and it was told.
Shall I comment on this part of the question first?
that,
And then you can proceed.
all right, okay.
Because it's very important to accept or reject this part of your, the basis you are making for the question to come. It is only St. John who reports that Jesus' body was anointed because it was a Jewish custom to anoint the bodies or to apply any sort of medicine or cream or ointment over the dead bodies. All the modern Christian scholars are unanimous on their view that there was no such custom, and this is one of the major proofs that St. John himself did not belong to the Jewish community. He was an outsider. This was his personal opinion, because this question also must have agitated his mind. Why, if he was dead, an ointment was applied? So he guessed that perhaps it was the custom of the Jewish people, so it was also implemented in the case of Jesus. So you can ask any knowledgeable scholar on this subject, and I assure you he will agree with my statement.
I would disagree with that, I think.
You
I
may
think
disagree
I think
with
there
me.
are other scholars
You may
who-
disagree with me, and all the Christian scholars, who I insist and repeat again, are unanimous on this issue. And ask the Jewish scholars as well.
There are many.
There was no such custom to apply any ointment to the dead Israelites. No question of that, because even today the Jewish people don't do it. It is only St. John's verdict and your agreement with him against the rest of the world. But of course you are free to hold any opinions, please.
Yes. Of course, there are many Christian or so-called Christian scholars with different views, and there are many, many books. If you choose particular books to read, you will get those views.
No, but I'm talking of the recent research on this issue where a unanimity has been ultimately arrived at. In previous books, I have also read exactly what you read, that without questioning the validity of this statement, many generations of Christians accepted the statement of St. John as valid. But in the past, no more. Thank you.
That's your opinion.
Yes.
Also, Jesus said, I lay down my own life. No one takes it from me. So he was saying that he was laying down his own life on
But
the cross.
can you find contradiction in Jesus?
No.
No. But what he was doing the night before, what was he praying? To whom?
He was going through turmoil.
To whom was he praying?
He was praying to his Father God.
And what he was begging for?
If it were possible that this would pass from him, but not your will, not my will, but
So
your
it was
will
not
be
his
done.
will, which had any command over life and death. It was the will of God. So they have two different wills, one subservient and the other dominant. This is another point which you have proved for me. Thank you.
Not quite. Also, another interesting aspect, which I'm sure you would say, well, John said it, so it's not true. He talked about blood and water coming out of the spear wound in the side, which other medical experts, which John wouldn't have known about at the time, but now see as a definite sign of death, that the blood was coagulating, separating from the water, and so you saw both coming out.
Again, there is a difference of our source materials. You must have read some books but I have read some others as well.
I'm sure you have.
Opinions which have been expressed by experts, medical experts, top people in their line. They say that when his side was pierced, it must have pierced the what they call, the lining around the pleura around the lungs. And whenever somebody is hung in such a state for so many hours with such torture, it is very likely, almost always it should be expected that pleurisy should develop from this. So this is the reason why water also came out. But all the scriptures are united on this statement that it was not coagulated blood, because the coagulated blood is never gushed out, or rushed out is also the word used in translation. What can, like a fountain, some can sprout something, but that is always the serum of blood, which is not separate from water at all. So this is not the right understanding of the events. If it was a dead body, then what should have spurted out should have been the serum mixed with color of blood. But it is impossible for the dead body to give forth water separately and blood separately. It can only happen in case of pleurisy.
And again, we read in different books.
Thank you.
But, and also the Roman soldiers who were responsible for the execution. I can't believe that these men would not know when a person was dead, especially if their lives may be on the line, if that person wasn't dead.
They were not medical experts, yet they were under the influence of Joseph of Mithia, a very close friend of Pilate, who was quite sympathetic to Jesus right from the beginning. That is why he washed his hands of his blood. And unless a very strong pressure and irresistible pressure was brought to bear upon him by the Jewish rowdy people gathered around, I am quite sure he would never have given the verdict which he ultimately was compelled to pass. So, it is quite likely that the soldiers there were also given the message that be kinder to this man, don't misbehave. And that is why it was Joseph who approached Pilate begging for the body. And that is why in the Bible it is said that when he told Pilate that I have come to beg for the body, he said, already dead? Why this surprise? So it is one way of understanding the same scriptural statements, and you have the right to another understanding, of course.
It often took many
Thank
days
you.
to die.
Thank you.
There's just one more.
But
Sorry,
I have been
Darren.
told that already we have passed the time, allotted time, by 10 minutes.
Could I just make one more point?
Okay.
Sorry about that.
Please.
In Luke 9:22, Jesus says that he must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, chief priests and teachers of the law, and he must be killed, and on the third day be raised to life. Jesus predicted his own
He
death and
predicted
resurrection.
this, but why do you forget that he also predicted as to the nature of what would happen and how it would happen? He said, no sign will be shown unto the people, this corrupt people of today, but the sign of the prophet of the fish Jonah. Was he right there or not?
We're talking about the
Could he
time.
contradict himself? He could
Talking
not.
about the time element.
He could not. No. This is your interpretation. I am talking of the people who heard this message from him. You were not there to tell them this is what he means. The obvious thing which they must have inferred from this statement was that Jonah, despite the fact that there were conditions which normally kill people, human beings. And there seemed to be no escape from the circumstances through which Jonah went. Yet he survived and was not revived. So those 3 days and 3 nights which you refer are in fact those 3 days and nights on which Jesus himself has thrown light. And I accept his statement, and I accept it on the principle that Jesus could not have contradicted himself.
He said he would be killed.
Thank you.
Rise again from
Killed, you again say killed, but why was not Jonah killed, and what would be the resemblance?
There are
The
many-
resemblance could not be until he survived the death, because he did not remain on the cross for 3 days and 3 nights. He remained in peril of death for 3 days and nights. So the understandings may differ. If you insist, you may continue to hold this view. But I am 100% certain that this is what Jesus meant. Apparently you will see me going through the situation through which Jonah went. Normally no man survives, but he will come out alive. Now this reporting of that he said he would come, he would be revived from the dead, this is very questionable. Why it is questionable? Because it was the compulsion of the early Christians to believe that he must have died and then, to claim that he must have died and then got revived from the dead. The compulsion was the Roman law. If a man was condemned to death then, as if he is condemned to death today, if anybody becomes accessory after the failure of the machinery to put such a person to death, is found to be guilty of being accessory, of smuggling him out, to helping him, he himself would be hanged to death. This was the compulsion of the society. They could not have said he never died in the first place. They said, all right, he died, but he revived from the dead. By adopting this strategy, they escaped the arm of the Roman law. So that is why I think they used the word dead, which Jesus could not have used, because he couldn't contradict himself. Thank you.
Beg to differ.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now with that, I take leave of you. Thank you very much for this very patient and very kindly hearing. And despite the disagreement, as you saw, the gentleman, he was very civilized and very kind and very patient with my rejections of his ideas, though I was also rather kind, I hope. So let's continue to hold such dialogue in this ideal atmosphere. Okay? I take leave of you now. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.